Oh, was that you? I thought you were already gone. Thank you, sir. Yes. Don't do that precious thing around the kids, all right? He sounds just like that thing. Anyway. So what we want to do is, anybody have any comments, observations, or questions about what we talked about this morning? For those of you who are online and you have some questions, I'm not sure we're pulling them from both places, and I'm kind of putting Jonathan on the spot, but are you able to see questions from Facebook and YouTube, Jonathan? Can you hear me? He can? Okay. All right. So if you have any questions come up there, go ahead and prompt them on the screen, and I'll try to do a little bit better job. I'm trying real hard, guys, that are online. But anyone want to get us started today? The man with the feet. I mean, with the... Yes, sir.
I really wanted to express how much I appreciated you allowing Sangwan and Diana and others to come up and speak in their native tongue, especially getting closer to Shavuot. I especially appreciated how Sangwan unknowingly gave the interpretation of what she was going to pray prior to, especially as it says, do all things in order, you know. And I didn't understand exactly what was being said, but I was very thankful that I know the heart of the people that were up there because I've spent time with them. And I could really hear the petition to our Father through the heart of what was being said. And that is what touched me the most, I think, when they were praying. And so thank you for being sensitive to that, because I think that was probably more indicative to a lot of things. You know, I could believe in the miraculous too, but that was pretty meaningful. All those different people out there in all the different languages, that for some reason or another, that might be the one thing that just ignited a spark in them. So thanks for being sensitive.
Well, I was telling Patrick right after the service, I'm not going to say that, you know, I heard the voice of God or anything like that. It was just, you know, is the atmosphere this morning with the praise and worship and the dance and the song and people just, you know, participating. It just created a good atmosphere, you know, one that was conducive to really sensing the presence of the Father. And as I was just standing there, I mean, it just kind of dropped, you know. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's kind of out in left field. But then, you know, after I thought about it, not really, because we are heading to Shavuot. And it is a time that we remember that in Acts chapter 2, it describes that there were people there, devout Jews from every nation on earth, and they heard in their own language the wonderful works of God. And so I really appreciate Sungwon and Diana and Jerry and Crystal Ann and Jean. And did I leave anyone out? I thought I said Jerry, but anyway, all the folks for letting me put you on the spot, but more importantly, for being used by the Father in that way, because I was touched by it all, you know. And I didn't understand a word Sungwon was saying, but I knew exactly what she was saying, you know. And the same was true with the others. And Jean, by the way, I didn't know you spoke French. I am so impressed, you know. So, but no, and I just believe that was the Father, you know, and it was a very, very touching few minutes there. So, amen. Yes.
And can I ask a question as I mosey over there?
Aren't you the sly one?
So I think of the Shemitah and the Yovel as being pretty important for me and my family to be a part of. But I've heard various different theories and various different teachings on when it aligns with in us nowadays and how we should observe it. And I just wondered if you have a particular take on all that, on those two questions. Like, is it something that we observe in a robust way right now? And if so, where are we in that tract?
Okay, well, let me address the last part of the question first. I have no idea. No, seriously. I know that there's some people who say that just a couple of years ago was the Shemitah year. And then my understanding, and I want to emphasize that, my understanding is from, if you want to go to the people who live in the land of Israel and ask them, the religious leaders say that you don't count that unless they're in the land, and I can see the reason for that argument, in the scripture. So everyone I've ever talked to that's in the land are very inclusive about it. And here's why. Because you could say that there are people in the land, but are all the people there in the land? And the answer to that part of the question is what? No. So when is it? I don't know. Because if we could calculate that, then we could pretty much come up when the Yovel is going to be. And in living in the day and age in which we are, if we could calculate when the Yovel is going to be, then we could have a pretty good idea when all this was going to wrap up. If we were in a Yovel, coming up on a Yovel very soon, at least as far as his reckoning, and nothing happened, we got 50 years to go. So now that's kind of my take on it. Now, as far as the concept of the Shemitah and the Yovel, as I said earlier, I know people who farm, some people who just have a little garden, they put into practice the idea of letting the land rest, because it is not necessarily a requirement if you're living outside the land, but that doesn't mean the concept doesn't work. Doesn't mean the laws don't apply or won't, work outside the land. And that's why I said what I did earlier, because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, not just the land of Israel, but the entire earth. And his word is going to go forth from Zion. The Torah is going to go forth from Jerusalem, and it's going to go through the whole world. And so those concepts and those precepts are eventually going to permeate the entire planet, which I would deduce from that things like this will become things that are done all over the world under the reign of Messiah. Okay? So I don't think there's anything wrong with, implementing the idea of letting the land rest every 7 years. The Yovel might be a little bit more difficult in terms of how do you apply that when we're in exile. Because the whole idea of the Yovel is if you're in exile, you're no longer in exile. You go back, the things are restored. I'm not sure how that would be applied in that way. I could make the argument that in Messiah, every day, every week, every month, every year is Yovel, in the sense that he has restored us back to the Father. He is restoring us back to the Father. He will restore us to the Father. So as far as the freedom and the liberty and that kind of thing. There's some of these things that I don't know. I just don't know. I'm one of those people that I believe that I think it's prudent that when you don't know, you just confess you don't know. And in time, as we garner more wisdom from on high, and we're led by his Spirit and guided, he brings us into more and more understanding of how we can do these things. Anyway, I didn't really answer your question, but that's the best answer I've got. Yeah. Hey, Nick.
Hey, good to see everybody.
This is my other nephew, Nick.
Here
Nicholas.
we go.
Nick. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I didn't have much to say, but my wife hates it when I get questions because then she's got to be on camera.
Get a tight shot, Jonathan, right now.
Aaron beat me to the question, but the comment on that was the Jubilee cycles, the 7-year Shemitah, really goes to show Yahweh's mercy on his people. Regardless what circumstances we get into, Yahweh's made a way for us. He's given us that time frame that the time of your turmoil is coming to an end. Mm-hmm. We don't know when it might be because we're not in the land, like you said. But we know that Yahweh's mercy is just around the corner. And like you said, it's every day. It's all day, all days. But at the same time, the fact that we get ourselves into predicaments of our own choosing, of our own design, yet Yahweh himself makes a way because of his love and mercy and compassion upon his children. And I, for one, am so glad and so blessed that he makes a way when I know justification says, I deserve the punishment. I deserve to walk out what I do. And it's true. But then he, in his loving kindness and compassion, says that time is coming to an end. Repent, get things right, and things come back in order in his time, in his way. And it's his love and compassion that allows us. Because I know I certainly don't deserve to be here. I certainly don't deserve to be in front of you good people. But Yahweh's love and compassion and his blood has washed me. And I'm so thankful for that. As far as the question, I think you already answered that. We're not in the land, and we don't know. But it's okay, because like you said, every day is the Shemitah and the Yovel, because his love and compassion is just that great.
Ecclesiastes 3, to everything there's a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. I can't know exactly when these things culminate. I don't know exactly when this is going to be and when that's going to end. But we can observe the signs and all the signals and all the indicators, and we can observe these things and know that, it's close. Don't know when, but we know that we're getting there. Now, my close and his close might, can be a little off, because we've been in the last days for 2,000 years, but for him, it's just 2 days. So, but no, I don't know when. I don't think anybody knows when. I mean, I'm going to go off on a little rabbi trail here just for a second. I'm sitting here in some degree because of a booklet maybe is the best way, called 88 Reasons Why Jesus Will Return in 1988. Yeah. All right. He missed it, obviously. Okay. He put a fine point on it and put a, definite time on it. And then when it happened in 88, he said, well, here's what I missed. Now it's 89. Anyway. But he was looking at the signs and the things that were going on, the indicators. So we can know that we're in the season. We may not know exactly when everything happens. In fact, as I understand it, when it happens, it's going to be suddenly, unexpectedly. And yet we're told to look, we're told to anticipate, we're told to observe what's going on, because we'll know the season. So anyway, I don't know that anybody knows exactly when these things are going to happen. I believe we can discern the seasons. And, like you said, the Father always makes provision for his people. He always gives us an opportunity and a path that leads to him. You know, it's incumbent upon us to take it, to utilize that. But, you know, he is long-suffering. He is merciful. And I want to say this one other thing, we'll move on. Mercy does not equate to approval. Right? Mercy does not equate to condoning. Mercy just means that he loves us and cares for us enough that he's going to give us an opportunity to find our way back to him if we're wise enough to take that opportunity. All right. If we count Sabbaths from Omer, I wonder if we should count sabbatical years. If so, how do we figure those since the count has been lost? Or was the count lost for a reason? I think we've already kind of addressed that. Was it lost for a reason? Well, the people weren't in the land, so they quit counting, I guess. But that goes back to what I said. If we could calculate exactly when the Shemitah year is, then we could calculate exactly when the Yovel is, and we could pretty much nail it down, you know, when all these things are going to come to a culmination. So yeah, I'd be tempted to say that these things were lost for a reason. We're in exile, so to speak, and so as we move closer to that time and we see the seasons and the indicators, I think we will have a better idea of what's going on. I'm just not into calculating. You know, I'm just not into trying to put a fine point on it and put the Father in a box, because every time we think we have it figured out, he throws a curveball in there, you know. I have a friend, I won't mention any names, but who was for the longest time convinced that Anwar Sadat was the Antichrist. And then they shot him. So he had to move on to another candidate. So anyway. Do you believe Exodus chapter 9 may have been a Yovel year? Well, let's see what happened in Exodus 9. I don't recall right off the top of my head. That was right before the locust, if I do remember that part. Bear with me a second. I'm just scanning through here to see what was going on in chapter 9. I don't know. I'm not seeing what you're seeing. So if the person who asked that question, if they want to come back and kind of give me a little more detail as to what's in there that would prompt that question, then maybe I can address it. But just off the top of my head, I have no idea. Okay, I'll take this one and then we'll take one in here. Is it important for a Christian to understand Hebrew and Greek? Well, I don't know Greek. That's for Brad to tackle, because Brad can do the Greek. Is it important for us to understand Hebrew? I think if you've been part of this group for any length of time, you understand that we love the Hebrew language, and that there is something about the Hebrew language in particular that opens up the Scripture in a totally unique way. So I wouldn't say that it is a requirement. I just say that it is a blessing to have a basic understanding of Hebrew. And I know enough to be dangerous, but I can say that it has truly enhanced my understanding and appreciation of the Scripture. Taking it forward a little bit, in Zephaniah 3, it talks about that there will come a day that the Lord will restore unto the people a pure language whereby they may call upon me with one consent. So there's that hint there in the Bible that one day we're all going to speak one language. I just don't believe it's going to be English. English is one of the most convoluted languages on the face of the earth. It's polluted, it's contaminated, it's got all this slang, it's got all these borrowed words and all these kinds of things. And modern Hebrew has some of that as well. But biblical Hebrew, the language that the Creator chose to converse with Moses, and then he wrote all these things down, taking dictation from the Creator, and then the prophets that followed him and all the other different writings that were originally written in Hebrew, at least most of them. That to me says something. And it says that there is a blessing in going back and trying to better understand that language. Diana, would it be fair to say that there are things in Spanish that can't be translated literally into English? Because if you were to translate them literally, it wouldn't make sense in English. Is that pardon? Especially jokes, yes. I have a story. Many years ago, Beth and I were invited to go out to Los Angeles and speak to, was it Guatemala? Yeah, okay. So Guatemalan, El Salvadorian congregation, it was Iglesia Elim. And apparently it was a big thing, in El Salvador and Guatemala and everything. Anyway, South Central LA. We were the only white folks in the neighborhood. Anyway, but there was another guy who had joined us on this particular trip, and he was from Schenectady. All right? Yeah. Really nice guy, pure-hearted guy, just great guy. He carried a briefcase that had a huge portrait of his little baby daughter on the side of it, You remember? So anyway, we're speaking to this large group of people through an interpreter. And he's got his interpreter, I've got my interpreter. So he's going to get up and he's going to speak to this group. And, he's going to do like most speakers do. Let's start out with a joke. Kind of break up the crowd, kind of loosen everybody up, And so he's speaking to the crowd who, through an interpreter. He's speaking English, the guy's speaking Spanish. And so he starts off. He says, "What's the smallest room in a house?" And the interpreter looks at him like, "What?" Yeah, what's the smallest room in the house? So he translates that into Spanish. And then he goes, "A mushroom." Here's what happened. The interpreter in Spanish speaks to the crowd and says, "Look, the guy's trying to tell a joke. It doesn't make any sense in Spanish, but when I get through, laugh." So when he got through, everybody, ha, 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 ha. And so he's like, "Well, here's another one for you." Anyway. Let me get back on the main trail here. Things don't always translate from Hebrew or Greek or Spanish or what have you into the language that you and I understand. If you were to translate it literally, some of the stuff wouldn't make sense. The kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. Okay? That's a pretty literal translation. However, in English, what does it mean? Okay? And so we've had all these different interpretations of what that was to mean. But really what he was saying is the kingdom of heaven's breaking out, because that's what the kingdom of heaven's supposed to do, right? If you have a good eye, then the body's full of light. What is that? That's an idiomatic expression. What does it mean in English? We don't know. But in Hebrew, to have a good eye is to be benevolent, to be generous, to be considerate. And so if you're a giving person, then this indication that your body is full of light. Because idioms don't translate literally and make sense. So all I'm saying here is that there is a benefit and a blessing to going back and to try to understand Hebrew. Do you have to have an understanding of Hebrew to understand the Bible? I believe that the Father, because he's merciful and compassionate, and he's always going to be reaching out, I believe the Father can speak to us in any language by his Spirit. And he can he can help us to understand what he's saying in his word in any language, because I've seen that happen. I've seen guys that have great insight into Scripture who never finished school. However, are there things, if I read my Bible in English, that I may not understand if I don't have some basic understanding of Hebrew? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. So is it important? I believe so. That's my opinion. All right, who's next? Yes, John. By the way, do you know Ben's taller than you?
Now you spread it everywhere.
He's taller than me too, actually.
Yeah. Wonder why that is. Anyway, what was it? Oh, yes. With the Shemitah and the Yovel, the books by Jonathan Cahn have an interesting picture of that in modern day life, like with the Harbinger and different things. And I just got done reading the Oracle, and he tied everything together at the end, and it was really amazing how he did that and just gave a good picture of those. But the other thing was, it made me think, too, of Moses when he was up on the mountain, and he was up there for 40 days, and the people thought he should have been back earlier or at that time, and then that's when they started doing the golden calf thing. But it made me wonder if he was up there 50 days and then came down on the 50th day. And I don't know. I guess, does that make...
Are you relating that to Shavuot or just in
Well,
general?
kind of. I mean, because I look at, too, Yeshua, after he was raised from the dead, was with people for 40 days, and then he went up into heaven. And then the disciples were in Jerusalem for 10 days, or it took 10 days to get there, whatever. Kind of the same kind of picture. So, I don't know, just a thought. Maybe kind of like now, we're looking for the return of Yeshua, and we think it should be at a certain time, but it's not, and then he comes back
When he's good and ready, yeah.
Right.
I know. Well, as far as the idea of the people having the expectation that Moses would return, on one day, and he doesn't come back when they think, and that, results in other things, I absolutely believe that we're going to see that, Where is the promise of his coming? Since the fathers have slept, everything has continued as it always has been. There are going to be scoffers, And the scoffers, to me, that Peter is pointing out or, referring to, don't seem to be the world. It seems to be people who know he's coming or expect that he's coming, but then he doesn't come when they think he comes, apparently. The 5 foolish virgins. Everybody went to sleep in the parable. The 5 foolish didn't have the extra vessel with the oil, which to me infers, anyway, they thought he would come before their oil ran out. But he tarried, he delayed his coming. So on that part of it, yeah, I definitely can see that. As far as relating it to Shavuot, when he came down initially and he spoke to the people, that would be Shavuot, and that was on the 50th day, That would be Passover, and then first fruits, what would become first fruits. It would be before Moses has gone up into the mountain for those 40 days and 40 nights. So that's a little bit of a different thing. But now I'll throw this out too. There's a lot of people who think that Messiah returns at Shavuot. Just to put a little twist on it. Is there anything else you wanted to share? Do you think Yeshua was crucified on a Yovel year? When he goes into the synagogue, what was it, in Luke chapter 4? Hold on. Let me look this up before I misspeak. Is it Luke? Is it Luke 4? Okay, I thought it was. Let's see. I want to start at verse 16. This is Luke chapter 4. And he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And then he closed the book and he gave it again to the minister and sat down. What is that, Isaiah 61? I think so. All right, so if you go and read the rest of what Isaiah 61 has to say, there's some things. If this has been given to us exactly as it happened, exactly what he read, and then he closed the book, then there were things that he didn't read there. But when it says that he has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, preach deliverance to the captives, recovering of the sight of the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. There are a lot of people who see in that the theme that goes with Yovel, the captives being set free, the slaves being freed, people's inheritance being returned to them being returned to their inheritance. They see that as thematically related to Yovel. Whether or not this is accurate too, but there are those that believe that Yeshua's ministry wasn't 3.5 years, but it was all within 70 weeks, which is a year and some change. So there's this argument, if you will, that everything he did was within that time period. And so it could very well be that he did all of these things in a Yovel year. My position would be, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that there's maybe circumstantial evidence that, could lead you to see that. Am I going to be dogmatic in that? I wouldn't. I think it's a possibility. I think it's a very real possibility. But to be absolute, I don't know. There are lots of questions that I have that when we go into the kingdom, I've got my list going. I'm sure you've got your list going too. Help me understand this better. Clear this up for me. That's one I can't be conclusive on. In Exodus chapter 19, where Moshe gives the commandments, when they were called to the mountain, the ram's horn, do you think this would have been a Yovel year? The instructions about the Yovel haven't really been given yet. I'm not going to say they weren't already in existence. They weren't already aware of that. But in terms of writing it down, it hadn't been done yet. Okay? That being said, what had just happened to them? They had come out of bondage. They had been liberated. And so they're being told, I'm going to take you into a land that flows with milk and honey. I'm going to take you and put you back in the land that I gave to Abraham and to his descendants. And so thematically, it is Yovel in that sense. They're being liberated and they're in the process of being restored. Was it a Yovel year? Don't know. Could have been. Who's next here? Yes.
Okay, so I was a little late getting in here, so if this was said already, I'll apologize. But
it was.
Just in case it wasn't. When you spoke of the Shemitah and you said that the beasts of the field and the poor were still allowed to partake, they didn't have to. It makes sense because that's two groups that would not have been able to store up in the preceding year enough to make it through a year. So that makes sense. But when you were saying that, I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking of how many laws we have, whether it's of Yah or of man. We've got so many rules and regulations and laws that we got to follow. But I think sometimes, and this kind of plays into something else, which is I've talked with folks in the past about things like what's my Shemitah? When am I supposed to take that break after 7 years? And I said, I don't know. If you really want to know when that's going to be for you, when did you first come to faith? Start counting from there. When did your faith first develop into where you're at now? Maybe start counting from there. I mean, pick how long you've been walking this walk, or just make this your Shemitah and then start over. I don't know. You can pick and start, but then tying that into what you just said about the poor especially being able to have something. Maybe that's part of while we are in diaspora that we don't actually have a year set aside, is because we constantly got poor with us. And when I'm taking a break, you're still providing. When you're taking your break, he's still providing. There's something still coming in to the body that helps provide for the poor, for the widow, for the orphan. And so they never have to go without, because most of us we do have some farmers in here, but most of us aren't living in an agricultural society, so they can't glean from the corners of the field. They get arrested. That's trespass, and that's just...
Or shot.
Or shot. That's just the nature of where we're at, When I was growing up, you got shot with rock salt and bacon riding, but, so...
That's because you and I grew up in the same area. So
Yeah. Now they use real bullets. But that's just the thought that I was hoping you could address, because as I'm looking at this, I think something important to take out of this is that while we have all these rules and regulations and stuff, we are never, the law, whether of Yah or of man, is never intended to intentionally hurt or neglect the poor or the needy.
Well, as far as the nuts and bolts or the mechanics of it, I've already conceded I don't know when these things should be. I just believe that the concept can be applied outside the land, and like people I know that farm and garden, whenever they grew their garden, when they started producing on their land, on the 7th year they let it rest. Did that line up with how heaven is reckoning these things? Probably not. But to me, and I'm just going to take what I feel I know of the Father and apply it to this situation. We are to come to him as little children. And little children don't always have the technicalities worked out. I'd even say sometimes, maybe even most of the time, their timing is off. But when you see the heart of a child is to please mom or dad, there is no mom or dad with any kind of heart that is going to punish them for doing something from their heart the best they know how. And I just personally believe that our Father has a big enough heart that it accommodates the fact that we are in exile. Being in exile muddies the waters, theologically speaking, but it doesn't take away from the fact that if we can see his heart in these things, i.e., taking care of the poor and the needy and the widow and the orphan and those kinds of things, then I hope I don't use the wrong words here, that compensates for our lack of knowledge in the technical thing. I think I said this last week. More than working on my theology, I think he's working on my heart. Because if he has my heart, he can correct my theology. And if I have the heart, you have the heart, we have the heart to help the widow, the orphan, the needy, those who don't have what others have. And even in the context of the Shemitah, you're deciding, I'm going to take my break here, There's somebody else that, they're still doing. They still have the obligation to take care of those that are in need. Apples and oranges here. But, with this whole COVID-19 corona thing that I'm honestly getting really tired of talking about, it has really provoked me and others in this congregation to reassess some things, to adjust ourselves, and to realize that more than just to teach people, we have to be prepared to take care of their practical daily needs, because there will always be those among us who come into a situation where they are in need, and we have to be prepared to do that. And so we're taking steps to do that. So anyway, I don't know that I fully addressed the issue, but that's kind of how I'm seeing it right now. So that seems to be the essence of it to me. It's redemption, it's restoration, it's liberty, it's consideration of those who are less fortunate, because he's being considerate of those who have lost their inheritance. He's made a way for us to get back. I saw a hand. Yes, Clifford. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have a lot of comments, and I'm going to skip all that because I really want to hear. Right before we broke to eat, you threw the hand grenade
I was wondering when that was going to come up.
And I'd really like to hear the rest of your comments on that stewardship or lack thereof and the replacement that you're thinking of.
You talking about the nation?
Yes.
All right, I'll speak plainly. I will no longer speak in parables. It's my hand grenade, right. I was just reading this many, many years ago, and as I was going through it, okay, I understood Isaiah 5. Israel is Israel's vineyard. Judah is my choice vine. I built the hedge about it. I put the tower there. I put everything in that vineyard that was needed for it to produce good grapes, but it didn't. I came looking for good grapes. It gave me sour grapes. I'm going to take the hedge down. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to let the vineyard be trampled underfoot. And of course, what he's getting at is Israel's going to be scattered, right? So Yeshua, who is a rabbi, speaking to a group of people who understand the cyclical nature of Scripture and how everything's connected to everything. And he starts talking about a vineyard. Boom. Isaiah 5 should come to mind. They know who the vineyard is. They know what the prophet has said in regards to the vineyard in Israel. And so he's using some of the same terminology. He put a hedge around it. He put a tower there. All the same things, or many of the same things that are mentioned in Isaiah 5. And he even addresses the issue very subtly, mind you, but he addresses the issue that everything belongs to the Father. The land is his. He just leased it. He gave a portion, an inheritance to Israel. You can't sell the land because it doesn't really belong to you. I'm giving you this as an inheritance. You're going to be custodians of it. Going back to the garden, he's the one who planted the garden. He just gave Adam the responsibility to tend to it, to protect it. And when he didn't do that, what happened to him? He kicked him out of his garden. All right? So all these things are connected. So he says that when vintage time drew near, he sent servants to the vine dressers, the people who are the custodians, and I won't read it again, but they killed one, they stoned another, they beat up another guy. That's what they did to the prophets, right? So fine, I want to send my son. Now the son is the one who's presenting this to them. I'm going to send my son. They'll respect him, certainly. And then we see what they say. Let's kill him. We'll seize the inheritance. We'll take it for ourselves. So what do you think is going to happen? Oh, he's going to destroy these wicked men. You're right. He didn't put it that way, but he agreed with them. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what's going to happen. In the kingdom, if you'll allow me, the vineyard is going to be taken from you, and it's going to be, I want to read this exactly as it's written, it will be given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. So it will be taken from these people that he was speaking to 2,000 years ago, and now they're just stewards, doesn't belong to them, but it would be their stewardship, their custodianship would be taken from them, and then it would be given to someone else, not the vineyard, but the custodianship, the idea of taking care of it, because their job would be to produce the fruits of that vineyard, all right? That we're also using terminology like the kingdom, because that's the way he put it. Are you with me so far? Okay. All right. The word lease is used here. I think some translations use the word let. But the whole idea of a lease is what? This doesn't belong to you. You can use it, take care of it, Because if you don't take care of it, we got a problem, right? But also, every time we sign a lease, what's in that lease? There's a termination point. There's a point that either this is going to have to be renewed or it's going to be terminated. It's not an indefinite situation. So if there, okay, the word that is translated nation there doesn't have to be a nation with borders. Okay, it doesn't have to be. It can be referring to a nation like we are a nation. The body of believers is a nation. We're a group of people that doesn't realize boundaries in the sense of, borders of this country and that country and that country. Because those of us who are in Messiah, we are brothers and sisters with people who are all over the world, speaking all these different languages, coming from all these different cultures. We all get that. And so I would say that it is obvious that the responsibility, the body of Messiah, who is also called Israel, okay, because if we're in Messiah, then you are the seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. So we're part of that. We've been brought into and become part of that family called Israel, not replacing Israel, but taking our place at the table as part of this family of faith. All right. So ultimately, the body of Messiah is responsible for producing this fruit. But my question is, my argument is it also possible? Because just in Hebrew thought, just because this is right doesn't mean this is wrong. This is right, that could also be right, I'm going to run around Mount Sinai here for a minute, all right? Nope, different cup. Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. Out of Egypt I have called my son. So when the prophet pens those words, Yeshua hasn't come. So what is he referring to? When they came out of Egypt, Moses led them out of Egypt. Out of Egypt I have called my son. Because in Exodus chapter 4, he refers to Israel. Israel is my son, even my firstborn. Out of Egypt I have called my son. But when Joseph and Miriam take the infant Messiah down into Egypt until Herod dies, then they return. Matthew says, thus fulfilling the prophecy, out of Egypt I have called my son. So it applied to what happened then. It applied to what happened when Yeshua came out of Egypt. And it's going to apply again because once again, he's going to call his son out of Egypt. Are you still with me here? All right, hang on, I'm on a roll. No, my point is that these things that are written in Scripture can be applied here, they can be applied here, and be applied here. Just because one is right doesn't mean the other is wrong, all right? So if there is a nation that is, it transcends borders, that's the body of Messiah, I absolutely believe that. But is it also possible that there would be a nation that its sole purpose for existing would be to render the fruits of that vineyard? All right. I'm going to go to the tablet here, Jonathan. You ever seen that word before? That's what some of your people called North America a long time ago. The Scandinavians. They called it Vinland. That means land of the vineyard. When Cristobal Colon, better known as Christopher Columbus, when he, in 1492, sailed the ocean blue on the Peña Ninta and Santa Maria, he had Jewish people on board. In fact, there are some who believe that Columbus himself was Jewish. They believed he was a converso. His family had converted from Judaism to Christianity. In fact, his name Colon in Italian means the same thing as the Hebrew word Yonah or Jonah, a dove. All right. So there were Jews on board. That is for certain. And when they first sighted land, as it turns out, on the old calendar, converting everything over to how we understand the calendar today, they would have first sighted land on what we now know as Hoshana Rabbah, the last great day of the Feast of Sukkot. And Sukkot is the wandering. It's you've wandered and now you're going to be ingathered. And I could go into a long thing about Columbus and his reasons for wanting to mount an expedition to the Indies. It wasn't to just go find gold. It was to go find the resources to liberate Jerusalem from not the Ottomans, the Moors, the Muslims, and this is written in his diary, to rebuild the temple. Why would a good Christian want to be building a Jewish temple? That's a good question. But when they saw land for the first time, it was the last great day of the feast on Hoshana Rabbah, and one of the prayers of that day says, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it verbatim, "Plant us upon a fruitful sod and make us thy chosen vineyard." So I'm condensing this a little bit. From America's very beginning, there has been this vineyard concept tied to it. I want to get my year correct here. I'm thinking it was 1602, 1603, 04, something like that. An English explorer by the name of Bartholomew Gosnold. By the way, if you ever go to Jamestown, Virginia, it's not an incorporated town now. It's an archaeological site. It's a national historical site. But they have a museum there. And they actually, many years ago, as they were excavating in Jamestown, they found where many people were buried. And they found one guy has all this stuff buried with him. Obviously, he's an important fella. And come to find out, this was the remains of Bartholomew Gosnold. That's just a sidebar. But in the early 1600s, Bartholomew Gosnold was exploring the eastern coast of what is now the United States. And he was in the area that we know as Massachusetts, around the Cape Cod area. And he found this island that was a big vineyard. So he decided to name it after his daughter, Martha. Okay. Again and again and again and again and again in American history, you find that there, for some strange reason, there is this vineyard theme that keeps popping up. When a gentleman by the name of Hooker, I think that was his last name, he was part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony that was Boston, Salem, Gloucester, those areas in the Boston area. He separated from them. And he went and established the colony of Connecticut and later became the state of Connecticut. The state emblem for the state of Connecticut is two vines that are growing into one vine. And the state motto is, "He who transplants sustains." If you go back to Isaiah 5, you will find that, and this is again paraphrased, that basically what the Creator was saying was going to say, I'm going to uproot you, but I'm not going to destroy you. There's language in there to suggest there's going to be a transplant. All right. Are y'all okay with this so far? Okay, all right. This is where it gets weird, if it hadn't already gone that direction. 30 minutes up I-75. It's underwater now. But where at the mouth of the Little Tennessee River and the Bat Creek used to come together, back in the 1800s, that was there were remains of what was once some of the last principal cities of the Cherokee Nation. And in a burial tell, a little stone was found. It's right now in the Smithsonian Institution. It's called the Bat Creek Stone. And on that stone, there was an inscription that people assumed in the time was written in the Cherokee syllabary. Because, you know, of the five principal nations, the Cherokee being one of them, they were the only principal nation, that is the Native Americans, who had a written language. Developed by a man named George Guess, but who was really known as Sequoyah. You can go up here and see his the thing that's devoted to him up here in just outside of Loudon, in Fort Loudon up here. He developed this Cherokee syllabary because he saw the white settlers, reading a book that is the Bible. But he was reading a book, and he was impressed with the fact that they would read this book and it would speak to them. And it reminded him of an ancient legend that the Cherokees once had the book that speaks, but that the Great Spirit had become angry with them, had taken it from them, but had promised to restore it to them. And so he used Hebrew, Latin, some Greek, some English characters, and he developed the Cherokee syllabary. It's kind of a hodgepodge of all that. But they were the only principal nation at the time, anyway, of the five principal tribes or five principal nations, civilized nations, who had a syllabary where they could write and communicate that way. That's how that was developed, by a man named Sequoyah. How far do you want to go with this? All right, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Got to run around the mountain a little bit first, okay? Has anyone ever heard of a man by the name of George Adair? Okay. No, not George, James. James Adair, sorry. James Adair was a Scottish trader who, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, lived among some of the southeastern tribes, principally the Cherokee. He traded with them. And he was impressed with the fact that there was a lot of similarity in the Cherokee culture particularly that he could see also in Israeli culture, in the Bible. For instance, they divided their nation into red towns and white towns. Red towns were war towns. White towns were peace towns, which meant that if you inadvertently killed someone, you could go to a white town and be considered safe until there was a hearing to determine whether or not you were guilty of what have you. There were also principal towns. And in the principal town, it was common for them to have a tell, a mound, and on the top of that mound, a seven-sided council house. Inside the seven-sided council house, they kept a box. Inside that box were sacred crystals. On either side of that box, there were two sentinels who would only allow one man one day out of the year to approach the box, because they had 7 festivals that they kept during the cycle of a year that are similar, not exact, similar in theme and timing to the 7 Moedim. They had laws, nidah, the laws of, a woman's purification and things like that. I could go on and on and on and on. But here's the one that really just nailed me right between the eyes. And I had this verified several years ago. I was in Hardyville, South Carolina. It's just outside of Savannah, Georgia. And I was speaking to a group of what was called First Nations people. And it was an interesting group. I'll put it that way. But I met a man who was introduced to me as being the eastern gatekeeper of the Cherokee Nation. Because the Cherokee Nation is divided into the eastern band and the western band. Because during the goal that people were looking for back in the early 1800s, that prompted the government to come in and put the Cherokee off their land, along with Creeks and others too, but mainly the Cherokee, on that thing called the Trail of Tears. Okay? A lot of the Cherokee, many Cherokee went up into the hills of North Georgia, East Tennessee, Western North Carolina, and hid. And their descendants are over in Cherokee and North Carolina and parts of Georgia to this very day. They're the eastern band of the Cherokee. Most of them were sent into exile out into Oklahoma and eastern Oklahoma. They're still there to this day. By the way, there are plans for reunification. There's plans for them to return to their ancient homeland. Anyway, when I met this gentleman, I had a question for him. And, there were some pleasantries, and we talked a little bit. And I said, I have read, and I want you to tell me if this is true or not. My understanding is that the Cherokee were unique in that they believed that there was only one God. He said, that is true. I asked him, I said, can you pronounce the name for me? We called him Yahweh. All right, not exactly what some would say, but to me that was, it was fascinating. All right, so where am I going with this? Oh boy, Bill, you have. Okay, we got to pause on that. And then we've already paused on the other, but I got to tell you another story. Y'all still with me? I'm probably going to regret this, aren't I? But anyway, many years ago, my wife and I are watching a movie. It's a chick flick. It's called A Walk in the Clouds. There was no, yeah. So we're watching A Walk in the Clouds. It's got Keanu Reeves, and the story is it's after World War II, and he's coming back home, and he's on a bus or something, and he meets a girl, and one thing leads to another, and they go back to her house, and her family owns a vineyard. And they came from the old country. But they own this vineyard, and he gets passed off as her husband. The dad suspects this, that, and the other. They end up falling in love and all that ookie-gookie stuff and all that, But in the middle, and here's why I liked it. In the middle of the story, Anthony Quinn, who plays the grandfather, he takes Keanu Reeves up to a little hill that overlooks the big vineyard. And then there's this little gated area where there's this one vine growing. And Anthony Quinn tells Keanu Reeves that all of this came from this. We transplanted a rootstock from the old country. We brought it here and we planted it. And now this is the result of all the shoots that come off that original rootstock. And when he said that, I went boom. Because all these other things, the Vinland, land of the vineyard, and all the different other things, and I've just shared just a little bit with you, come together, and it made me wonder, Father, is it possible that you could have, in Isaiah 5, when you talk about you tread down that vineyard, is it possible you could have transplanted some over here? Bat Creek stone, the one that was found up here, that's in the Smithsonian Institute, has an inscription that was believed to be written in Cherokee, remember? But then later on, they turned it around. And they discovered this is not Cherokee. This is ancient Hebrew. And in ancient Hebrew, it has wording similar to what Bilam says when he said, a star shall arise out of Judea. It talks about a star rising out of Judah. It's a messianic prophecy. So the question then is, how, and it was carbon dated to the 1st century, along with some other metal alloys that were not supposed to exist in North America until after Columbus, but here they are. We're dating it to the 1st century. So how did all these things end up in a Cherokee burial tale in southeast Tennessee that date to the 1st century and have inscriptions that seem to allude to Judah, Jews, Hebrew? How did this happen? I'll leave you to determine how it happened. But is it possible that the Father did in fact do it, just what the Messiah did, what he said he was going to do? The vineyard was taken from one, the custodianship of that vineyard anyway, and then it was given to someone else. And their sole purpose for existing was to render the fruits of that vineyard. And with all due respect to our friends who are all over the world in different countries, in the modern era, what other one nation has done more? I'm not ignoring the warts and flaws that this nation has. We all know that they exist. But What other one nation has God used to spread the message of, of this kingdom? Are there other nations that he used? Absolutely. But, well, let's put it this way. Here is what the United States is called in Hebrew. Artzot, lands of the covenant. In Hebrew, Israel refers to the United States as the land of the covenant. So is that just an accidental thing? Is it a happenstance? Or is there something in this? Okay. How many colonies were there originally? 13. How many tribes were there? Well, 12 plus. Okay. David ruled and reigned for how long? 40 years. 7 in Hebron, 33 from Jerusalem, a total of 40 years. How long did Solomon reign? 40 years. A total of 80 years. After Solomon, Rehoboam comes to power, and soon thereafter, what happens to the nation? They divided to north and south, right? In 1781, Lord Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, Virginia to the Continental Army, effectively bringing an end to the American Revolution. Agreed? 1781, now count forward 80 years. 1861. What happened in 1861? The nation divided into north and south. One last thing here, and I'm going to shush. Hold on, Bill. I want to make sure I got this right. No, that's not right. That's how you write the Hebrew year 5535. Why is that important? Well, because on the Gregorian calendar, it would be this year, 1775. Did anybody recollect any important event in American history that happened in 1775? April 19, 1775 to be exact. The shot heard round the world, which was Lexington Concord. Now, why? Well, never mind. Okay? But you know what this word spells in Hebrew? What it means? Stumbling stone. I want to introduce again what the Messiah said. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And whoever falls on this stone will be broken, and whoever it falls will grind him to powder. So I'm just wondering, is there a group of people that are to bring forth the fruits of this vineyard? We are those people, the nation of the body, the Messiah at large, in every nation. But is there a nation that God purposed would come into existence for the sole reason of producing the fruit of that vineyard? And then when they produce that fruit, when that purpose has been fulfilled, and because this was let, and there's a termination point, and then we bring back the laws of the Yovel when everything returns back to the way it was originally intended. Are we living in that nation? And are we living in the time when that fruit is appearing? Because again, what's the word for fruit? Double fruit in Hebrew? Ephraim. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole two-house thing. I don't believe in that, we're descent. Well, I don't believe that everybody who's a believer is by has to be descended physically from Abraham. Okay, we are seed of Abraham because we're in Messiah. All right, but function. What is our function? To produce fruit. And by the very nature of that definition, those are producing the fruit of the vineyard, those who are producing the fruit of the good seed are in their function. That is what Ephraim is supposed to be. Ephraim was the one who was blessed. Isaiah 11, what happens? Judah will no longer harass Ephraim, and Ephraim will not, what was the word? I'm sorry. Envy, thank you, Judah. So there's a lot of things going on here. But our function, our purpose as a nation, this is what Bill's convinced of, is to bear fruit of the kingdom. And when the fruit appears and it's vintage time and the fruit is gathered, where's it going to go? Where do we end up? All right, now I'll let you answer. I had to get through all of that first.
But you just led it right up to where the other brother brought up.
Wait a minute. Where's the microphone? For the folks out here, he does.
So then we come back to the place that you were a couple of three before the whatever, that Paul said in 2 Thessalonians, until you see, right, concerning the returning of the Son of Man, until you see the diaspora. And you said, that doesn't necessarily mean falling away. It also means leaving.
It means departure.
Departure.
Apostasia
So if this
means
lease is
departure.
up, when this lease is up,
There's
and
a
we
departure.
are departing, then, because we were talking about what's the timing, so we're looking for the end of the lease period and the regathering to take that fruit with us to present to the Father.
Well, we are that fruit, in a sense. You know, we are producing that fruit. But
Right.
yes, that's what I'm saying. When it's vintage time, when it's time to harvest that fruit, what does the owner do with it? You know, and what becomes of that vineyard? You know, everything gets restored back to its original inheritor, right?
Which is why it doesn't matter when you start the labor, you all are going to get the same wage because you all participated in the labor.
Yeah, I mean, the guy that starts at the beginning of the day and the guy that starts at the end of the day, they get the same wage, right? But I guess I was, I'm just kind of convinced. The United States is here not just to be the eternal superpower, because we're not going to be the eternal superpower. There's only one kingdom, there's only one nation that is guaranteed to be eternal, and that is the Israel that is under the kingship of the Messiah, right? The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. And there are no exceptions to that, including this one. But leading up to that, what has been the purpose for this nation? And again, I say that respectfully in consideration of the fact we've got folks that are watching us from all kinds of nations. There are people here in this room who came here from other nations, and we don't say that with any disrespect to their nation. It's just that it's not about who's the biggest, who's the most important. It's about the function. It's about the purpose. You know, what purpose do you serve? And America, as far as I'm concerned, it seems to be the reason it came into existence, the reason we're a melting pot, the reason that we're a collection of all these different nations is because it's a microcosm of what the Father was going to do in the end of days among all the nations. And yet, for some time, all the nations have looked to this one to be an example. And right now, we're failing miserably in that. But even in the midst of all this that's going on, where things are going off the rails, at the same time, look at what's happening. Look what he's doing. All right. Since I've already probably freaked some people out, let me just go ahead and put a cherry on top. I know that you're next, Dawn. I haven't forgotten you. All right, well, I don't know why all of a sudden that's not going to work. What is this? All right, well, it's just, I don't know, it's just decided to freeze up. All right. Going back into American history. I know it's been a long time. Do you know where America got its name? Tell me. Amerigo Vespucci, right? Ironically, named after a man who never set foot in America. But he was one of the first to see that what Columbus had discovered was not the Indies, but a new world. And so when he reported this back to Europe, there was a cartographer by the name of Waltismuller, who was the first to draw a map based on navigational observations, the first one to draw a map and name this new world after the man that he heard this news from, Amerigo Vespucci, and he's the first to call it America. Now, what does Amerigo mean? It means rich in wheat. So, in other words, America, if I can put it this way, is a wheat field. All right? But what gets sown in the wheat? Tares. And the tares grow together with the wheat until the harvest. All right? So what do we see going on outside these doors and windows? Tares growing in the midst of the wheat. And I would argue that they're beginning to put forth their fruit. You're beginning to see what we always knew it was, but now it's being made evident. It's being made clear because the fruit is being produced. When we've got governors in the state where all of this started, in Virginia, the Old Dominion, and when we got the governor of Virginia making statements, well, if a mom wants to have an abortion and the baby's born anyway, then we'll set it over there on the table and let mom and the doctor decide what happens to it. That's the fruit of the tare. When we've got people who are born male claiming they're female and vice versa, or they're not even that, they transcend all that, that's the fruit of this. And then, I could go on and on and on. You understand what I mean, all right? So the tares are putting forth their fruit. But in the parable, as the tares are putting forth their fruit, guess who else is putting forth their fruit? The wheat as well. And again, what's the Hebrew word for fruit? Ephraim, okay? And if we go back to Matthew 21, when the fruit is appearing, then that means that nation is coming to the fruition of the reason it existed in the first place. We don't know when, but we can observe the signs and know the seasons. Okay? Now, I realize that I'm going to catch heck from some folks about all of this, but I am convinced of it, and I want to make certain that everybody hears me on this. I do not believe the United States is any better or any worse than any nation, frankly. I just believe that there was a particular purpose for the United States. Everybody wants to know, where's the United States in prophecy? Bill's opinion? Right here. Right here. But what we see is that this nation came into being with a great responsibility. And we're falling short in that. But it could also be that some of the things that we're seeing is because it's vintage time. It's harvest time. These things are coming to a fruition. Do we know exactly when it's going to happen? I have no idea. All right, but I'll stop on this point, and you made it clear. When all these things are starting to be revealed, that's when the departure occurs. That's when he's going to gather those who are the captives among his people, and he's going to plant them in their land, and they will no longer be rooted up from that place. Dawn. Man, I got long-winded on that. I'm sorry, but anyway.
While you were talking, I was thinking about America and Israel, and you were talking about the vineyards and the vines, and we had back in 2012, gone to Israel to work in the vineyards to harvest the grapes. And during that time, we learned that they actually use the wild American grapevine roots to
I am going to have a throwdown right here. All right, go ahead. I'm
grow-
sorry. Go ahead.
to grow the grapes because they were resistant to pests and mold. There was a specific type of fungus, I guess, that would attack the roots. And so once people started coming from America to Israel, all their grapevines started to die. So they had to plant American roots in Israel and then graft their grapevines on top of the American roots. So if you actually go to Israel now, the grapevines that are on the Mount of Blessing have on Har Bracha have American roots.
I'm telling you what, the hair on the back of my neck is standing up right now.
I thought it was pretty cool.
That is really cool. I did not know that. Hey, look, I'm gonna tell you one other thing, and I'm gonna hush. I know this has not been the traditional Midrash and discussion about the Torah portion. It's his fault. It's Clifford's fault. I know. I kind of planted that seed in your mind, didn't I? Yeah. Go back to the movie. Toward the end of the movie, the vineyard catches on fire. And it burns. And everybody's sitting around. The father has got, ashes all over him. Everybody's just distraught. They're speechless. They're just stunned. Because everything they've worked for all these many years is just gone. And then all of a sudden, Keanu Reeves starts thinking about what Anthony Quinn told him. And he runs up to the top of that hill, and he finds the original rootstock. And he gets it up out of the ground. He pulls it up out of the ground, and he takes it to the father. And the father cuts into it, and he says, "It's alive." And then the credits roll. And then you see this new vineyard beginning to... That, I know it sounds crazy, but the Father spoke to me a lot through that. Just the principles, the concepts in it. And everything that he puts out here in the world, in the field, in the vineyard, in the fruit trees, and all that stuff that we can observe, he did that to teach us what he does and how he works and how he operates, not just in our everyday lives, but what he's doing universally. And, okay, folks out there, they put me up to it. Hopefully that, I know we got into some history and some kind of some weird history, but it is history. But I hope that there's the essence of what I'm trying to say here resonates. And maybe the Father can take that and use it in some way to speak to us. All right. It's after 5. I want to be respectful of the folks who are working with our young people and our children. And besides that, I want to go home and take a nap. But it's been a really good day. I hope that it's been a good day for you. I hope that it will continue to be a good evening for you. I hope that this week is going to be a great week for everybody. I know that we got a baby shower tomorrow, a couple's baby shower. Yay. Walt can come. That's right. Walt's going to be here, aren't you, Walt? Walt, if I got to come, you got to come. All right? But I guess we'll see some of you tomorrow. Those of you who won't see, we'll see you Wednesday night. And if we don't see you Wednesday night, we'll see you next Shabbat. But who am I going to pick on this time? No. Steve, come up here, brother. Somebody hand him the microphone and let him dismiss us in prayer. Let's everybody stand.
Father God, we just thank you for teaching us and instructing us. We just pray that we can retain the things that you've taught us and the seeds that you've planted in us, and that they will continue to grow. And we just thank you for this. We thank you that we have a place to meet, and that we can congregate here and in safety and know that we're protected by you. And we just thank you, praise you, and worship you. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen, everybody. Have an early Shavua Tov. Blessings.